Hi, I'm Becki McBride. I'm one of the occupational therapists at Anna Shaw Children's Institute. And tonight I'm going to talk about our sensory issues causing my child's behavior. We're going to talk about what behavior means, some functions of behavior, some factors that impact behavior, and some strategies that help with that. And then I'm going to also talk about sensory processing and sensory diet and what you can do at home. So behaviors can be positive or negative, but for the purpose of our talk, I'm going to address what we might call some bothersome behaviors. These are behaviors that interfere with a child's ability to learn, to function, or that might be harmful. Examples might be fidgeting, inattention, whining, meltdowns, running away, spitting, hitting, kicking, things like that. Learned behaviors are often strategies that the child uses to cope with situations, and behaviors that are followed by its success or reward or reinforcement are quickly learned. So an example of that would be, let's say it's time for little Charlie to go to bed. So you tell him to go to bed, he doesn't want to. So he screams and he falls down in the floor, and if he has words, he might say no. And this is the first time that he's had this behavior. So how his parents respond to this behavior may determine whether or not he repeats it. And so he may get negative attention. So if mom gets really upset and she starts yelling at Charlie, she gets angry or she gets emotional, then he's still getting some attention and he may repeat that behavior. Or if mom's frustrated and so she just says, okay, Charlie, you can stay up 30 minutes longer and watch TV. So then he gets a success. So then again, he may repeat that behavior. So a response that may help extinguish the behavior instead of reinforcing it would be to quietly guide little Charlie to his feet, to help him go to his room, and then to just ignore his screaming. There are four primary functions of behavior that we're going to talk about: attention, escape, tangible, and sensory. Most of the time, when a behavior occurs, it's a form of communication. So the child may be trying to tell us when they're acting up that, oh, the room is too noisy. Or they may be saying, oh, their schedule has changed, or they may not want to sit at the table, or they may want their teacher or parents' attention. Behaviors are often very complex, and they typically, there's more than one factor that plays into them. But first, we're going to talk about attention. So why does behavior occur? Attention would be just that desire for attention. It can be from the peers or from adults. These are behaviors that usually occur when specific individuals are present. If it's peer attention, then the behavior may occur most all the time if they're in a school setting. So for attention, it is person specific, not event or location specific. The strategy that I use to address that is ignoring. So an example may be, I have a friend that I work with here, and she will oftentimes take a toy that's not supposed to be put in your mouth, and she'll look at me and she'll try to put the toy in her mouth, but she makes eye contact with me the whole time that she's doing it. And so I just ignore that behavior. She's not going to put that in her mouth. Or sometimes she will say, because she doesn't want to do the work, she might say, you mean, and again, she's just trying to get my attention or get mom's attention. And so typically I just try to ignore that. So why does a behavior occur? A tangible, that is just a desire for a specific item or activity. This behavior often occurs when something has been denied or taken away. It is not person or event specific. So again, maybe time that you have to take little Charlie's iPad away and then he has a meltdown. Or maybe he's been playing outside and it's time for him to come in. He doesn't want to come in from the swing outside, and so he'll have a meltdown. The strategy that I use to address that is redirection. And so I try to find something else that's fun or desirable and offer that to them to try to get them focused on another activity. The next reason a behavior might occur is for escape. And this is escape from a person, an activity, or environment. This behavior usually occurs in response to a specific person, event, or a request to perform an activity. And so if I ask little Charlie to come over, sit at the table and do some work and he doesn't want to, and he throws the toy in the floor, what I try to do is offer a replacement for that. And so I'll say, oh, okay, Charlie, you're done, you're finished. And so I help him pick up the toy. We're going to clean up, and we clean it up, and I'm trying to replace that behavior. You can use signs, so it can say all done or finished, or sometimes we use pictures that say that as well. But that's just one example. The next reason a behavior might occur is for sensory. And this is when the behavior feels good or it meets a sensory need. These behaviors occur anytime or anywhere. They are not person, event, or location specific. They may occur more often when under stress. And the strategy to address that is typically sensory activities. When I'm talking to my parents and we're trying to determine what an underlying cause of behavior is, typically I ask them, do you have a good idea of why little Charlie is having meltdowns? And most of the time the parents do. Most of the time they'll say, well, he thought we were going to McDonald's, or he doesn't like transitioning from one place or another. But when the parents tell me, I have no idea why little Charlie is melting down, he does it all the time, we have no clue why, then typically I'll look at those sensory reasons. So when we think about the behavior, we want to try to figure out or determine the function of behavior. So we think about the antecedent. So what happened before? Is little Charlie sick? Is he hungry? Did he not have a good sleep last night? We think about, does the behavior always occur at the same time of day or in the same place? We think about environment as well. Has there been a change in his schedule? An example of an environment issue may be, let's say little Charlie can follow directions when he's in a one-on-one environment. But when he goes to the gym, he always gets in trouble because he has a harder time following directions in that type of a setting. Then we have direct observations. We want to know when, where, and with who does the behavior occur. And again, sometimes it may be more than one thing causing the behavior, or the same behavior can be caused by different things. And what I mean is I have a little friend who likes to spit in our therapy sessions. Well, sometimes I think that he's spitting because he doesn't want to do what we're asking him to do. We have a toy or a task, and so he doesn't want to do it. But then also I think he spits because he likes the way it feels on his mouth. So it's two different things going on. And finally, when we're trying to determine the functions of behavior, I would recommend talking with your healthcare provider. Here at Anna Shaw, we have developmental pediatricians, speech therapists, occupational therapists, PTs, behavioral specialists, psychologists, and we all help try to determine the cause of behavior, and we can help develop a plan to address it. Behaviors, of course, vary from child to child, but they are more likely to occur in certain situations. And so typically, the factors that impact behaviors, a large room, having unstructured tasks, poorly planned transitions, environmental factors such as noise and clutter, a change either with people, places, or activities, if a child is bored, or if they've had a really long wait time. The strategies that may help with behavior, and again, behaviors are child specific, but typically what helps is having structured tasks, and that just means having a definite beginning and an end, having stimulating activities, and that's sometimes a challenge. You want them, you want the task to be hard enough that the child isn't bored, but that it needs to be easy enough that they can complete it without getting too frustrated. Typically, what helps with behavior is being in a smaller room or area, being around familiar people, a quiet environment that has a decreased amount of toys. Typically what I'll tell my parents, instead of letting a child have a big basket full of toys, to only bring out 1 or 2 toys at a time, so they have less things that that are trying to get their attention. I also talk to the parents that I work with about turning the child away from distractions, turning off your TV if you're working in a room with the TV, or having the child turn away from the TV to be able to do some tasks. Repetition and routine, pre-planned transitions. Sometimes we'll use a transition item, so it can be just something, a car or a toy, or even a ticket or a picture schedule to help with transitions. Some other strategies that help with behavior, often we'll use movement or play. So we may have a structured play activity, and then the child will have a movement break, a sensory activity, or some unstructured play, and then come back and do a structured activity. The other thing we use is a visual schedule, and this can be objects, pictures, or words, and that helps as well. We will use a first and then schedule, and that is typically just means we'll say first sit, and then they get the iPad. A visual timer works well. You can use that for preferred or non-preferred activities and for transitioning. So for instance, you could say, little Charlie, you could set the timer. Okay, you can play on the iPad for 2 minutes, and then you have to work for 2 minutes, or vice versa. We also use reward or incentive or star charts. With that, the child typically chooses a reward, and then he completes in 3 to 5 or however many tasks in order to receive the reward. Some other strategies that may help with behavior is just providing positive feedback on preferred behaviors. You can say, little Charlie, I like how you're sitting in your seat at lunch. You can also use planned ignoring. So when little Charlie's saying inappropriate things, or he's maybe throwing in the floor, you can just choose to ignore that behavior. Or again, you can use replacement behaviors. And so when he throws something in the floor, oh, I see you're all finished, you're all done, let's clean up. So next we're going to talk about sensory processing. And basically what sensory processing means, or sensory, sometimes you'll hear the word sensory integration. It's just the ability to take information in from the environment, filter that information, and respond appropriately to it. So we all know the 5 senses that we're familiar with, which is seeing, hearing, tasting, smell, and touch. And typically with OT or in therapy, we focus on the tactile or touch system, proprioception, and vestibular, and I'll talk about those a little bit more. So for tactile, that just means the information that we get from touch. Typically, light touch is alerting. If you think about if a bug lands on your arm and you kind of jump, so that's alerting, and deep touch is calming. So you think about like a massage, a lotion rub, that typically is more calming. Proprioceptive input is the information that we get from joints that tells our body where we are in space. So if I were to close my eyes, I can tell without looking if my elbow is bent or straight, and that's proprioceptive. There's receptors in our joints that tell us where we are in space. Proprioceptive input is typically calming. If you hear the words heavy work, that's an example of proprioceptive input. That's pushing, pulling, carrying something heavy. All of those things engage the proprioceptive system, and it helps regulate our arousal level. Vestibular is the next sensory system. That's the information that we get from our inner ear. It tells our body if we're moving. Acceleration, deceleration is an example. It tells us how quickly we're moving and in what direction. Vestibular input is one of the strongest ones, and it lasts the longest in our system. It sometimes can last up to 6 hours, actually up to 12. It can be alerting. If you think about kids that swing or spin around really fast or kind of move in irregular patterns, that's alerting. And then calming, that's more swinging in a rhythmic fashion. Think about being snuggled in a hammock or in a rocking chair. That motion is more calming. So there's a lot of different, I guess, difficulties in sensory processing, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about a couple of them. So some children react to sensory input in just a variety of different ways. And so some children's sensory systems may be under responsive, and that makes them crave certain input. So if you think about the kids that have their shirt in their mouth all the time, or the ones that are, when they walk down the hallway, they're touching the walls, or the ones that just can't sit still, they're just always moving all over. Those are the ones that are craving that sensory input. We call them sensory seekers. Or you have some children's sensory systems that may be over-responsive, so they avoid sensory input. We call that defensive. So those are the kids that they don't like tags on their shirts, or they are funny about the lines in their socks. Maybe they dislike loud noises. And a lot of times you'll see some children that have a mixture of both. So you may have a child who is defensive of oral input. They don't want certain foods or certain things in their mouth, but then they seek out movement all the time. So I'm going to talk just for a minute about just some different strategies that can help, sensory strategies that can help with some of these behaviors. This is a very general list, but for under responsiveness, and those are our sensory seekers, some ideas of things you can do chair push-ups. That just means pushing your hands down on a chair. You're pushing your bottom up out of the chair. Weighted vest. Finger fidgets are good, rocking chairs, ball chairs, that heavy work that I talked about. Chewy foods are good, and having movement breaks. For the kids that have the over-responsiveness, sensory defensive, that deep pressure input is good, that's calming. The heavy work, again, or using the weighted backpack or the weighted vest. So next, I'm just giving some examples of some different behaviors that we might see and some sensory strategies to work on that. And so for that child that is always chewing on their shirt, always putting something in their mouth, we might give a chewy. We have called P's and Q's, different kinds of things that they can use to substitute that. We also might use chewy food items. A lot of times if a child does eat like gummy bears, I'll say put the gummy bears in the fridge or in the freezer, and that gives more input for them. For our friends that are constantly moving, that are all over the place, swinging usually helps. Again, that heavy work, crawling over and under things, sitting and working on a ball. Again, the friends that are climbing on furniture or just climbing the walls, it seems like. Heavy work is really good. I'm going to keep saying that because, again, that proprioceptive input is calming, and you really can't get enough of it. Pushing and pulling activities are good for that. For a child that dislikes loud noises, so they freak out maybe in public restrooms when the toilets go off, or they don't like to hear the vacuum cleaner. You can use earbuds or noise canceling headphones. You can use sound machines, or you can just have a quiet room or a space where they can go. Again, when we have friends that are maybe hanging their bodies off, that they like to hang upside down or lean back in chairs, Swinging is good for that as well. Jumping on trampolines, riding on bikes, or if they aren't riding bikes, they can sit on scooter boards or they can sit in a wagon, and you can pull them in a wagon and get that same input. For the kids that dislike having their hair brushed or their hair washed, typically tight squeezes. You can wrap them up in a blanket and give a real snug squeeze, but deep pressure massage and weighted blankets help with that. Also vibration helps with that as well. For the friends that are always running, they just don't have any idea where their body is in space. They're running into objects, they run into the wall, they stomp and walk real loudly. Trampoline, jumping on a trampoline works well. Doing yoga stretches, and again, those deep pressure massages works well. We have some friends that like to flick their fingers in front of their eyes. So for that, you can use light boards, you can use flashlight, bubbles are good to address that. For our friends that maybe rock their bodies all the time, or they like to jump, or they like to be on their tippy toes, bouncing on a therapy ball, rocking in a rocking chair, swinging, pushing and pulling a weighted wagon. Also TheraBand, a lot of times that stretchy exercise band, you could put that on the bottoms of chairs and kids can push their feet against that, and that's helpful. For the kid that touches everything, that like their hands are always on no matter everything, the walls, the floor, the tables, deep pressure works well, heavy work again, and then sensory bands where they have a variety of different textures to touch. Some of you guys may have heard of a sensory diet. We're going to talk about that for just a minute. Basically, a sensory diet is just a collection of sensory activities that are incorporated into a child's daily routine. It just helps them be able to participate more in their daily living skills. These sensory activities are typically either calming or alerting. And a sensory diet is typically created and monitored by an occupational therapist in collaboration with the child and the family. So just want to give you just a little example of that. So for instance, little Charlie, when he wakes up in the morning, he's really grumpy. It's just not a good time. So some sensory things that we might can do is, okay, we want to use dim lights. We want to present him with a thick, cold smoothie. That helps with calming. Little to no talking, and then giving him hugs and a blanket. Maybe little Charlie has a hard time at nap time or at bedtime and he can't fall asleep. So with that, we might recommend room darkening blinds, using a weighted blanket, or maybe giving him story time in a rocking chair first. At dinner time, maybe little Charlie is wiggling all over the place. He doesn't sit still. And so we might say, okay, have him jump on a trampoline first and then sit, or have him sit on a wiggle seat, which is an air-filled cushion that you could put in the chair. The thing about a sensory diet is it is trial and error. And so typically we'll recommend activities, and then we'll have the parents come back and tell us whether or not they're working. Sometimes they'll work for a little while, and you may see a change in the behavior, and then either something else crops up, or over time that sensory activity doesn't work, and so we have to make changes. The other thing I wanted to mention is when you are using a sensory diet, you're using that in conjunction with those other environmental strategies. So you're still going to use a structured schedule and possibly a visual schedule and some of those other strategies that we talked about earlier. So just to review, what can you do at home? Well, first, you want to provide structure. You want to use that visual schedule. Again, a visual schedule can be pictures, it can be words, it can be objects. Sometimes with the kids that I work with, even if they can't read per se, I'll even just use a little word in a checkbox, and they just know that they have to check off the first thing, check off the second thing. Using a visual timer is very helpful. for non-preferred task and for preferred task, or transitioning between activities. And so in other words, if you're wanting little Charlie to sit at the table, you may set the timer and have him sit at the table for so long, and then he gets his iPad for so long, and you're going to use the visual timer for that. Again, those controlled transitions is helpful, using transition objects or visuals. For the environment, you're going to decrease the distractions. Now, you're really going to take the cue from your child. Some children get distracted and their behaviors may be elevated when they have more things in the environment going on. Some children may be seeking that visual input. So again, it just depends on the child. So, but you may need to lessen the amount of distractions in the room. You're going to use the use of routine. And then again, if it's a child that's distracted or overwhelmed by a lot of things, you're going to only pull out a couple of toys at a time. You're going to try to be consistent. This is tough, I think, sometimes for us, for any of us. You want to praise preferred behaviors. What a great job you're doing. You're sitting at dinner. You're going to ignore those non-preferred behaviors, and you're going to try to teach the replacement behaviors. This is really difficult to do, and it typically requires additional support and information from other healthcare professionals. So this is something that you could talk about with some of your other healthcare professionals about how to replace some of the behaviors that you may be seeing. Other things you can do at home is the use of those incentive charts, reward charts, star charts. Again, you're going to use reinforcers, and that's just what a child chooses as a preferred activity. It's sometimes it's food, sometimes it's toy, sometimes it's an activity, or you can use the first then. So then you might have two pictures of first jump and then sit a chair, something like that. So for the sensory activities, you're going to consult with an OT, hopefully, because really the use of sensory activities is going to depend on what the child needs. An example of that may be they need to swing and do a big, busy work before they're asked to sit and do their homework. Or we may recommend using a weighted lap pad in their lap or a blanket to help with calming or sleep. Again, some examples of those calming activities is the slow swinging, typically swinging also in one direction, usually it's like front to back. Firm touch, those heavy work activities. Heavy work, again, is that proprioceptive input. That's any loading of your joints, pushing and pulling, especially weighted, something that's weighted. The use of weighted lap pads, blankets, and then alerting activities. That's light touch, it's that fast movement pattern, fast swinging circular patterns, and sour foods also are typically alerting, considered alerting. I hope that this provided you with a few things that you can take away and use at home with your child, and I appreciate you watching, and please contact me with any questions. Thank you so much.